In a world where every other horror channel has talked about how to survive a horror movie, comes another channel talking about how to survive a horror movie. Hey everyone, welcome to After Dark Analysis. Today we are going to be talking about how to survive a horror movie. Since the 90s, specifically after the popularity of Scream, it seemed like everybody knew the quote-unquote horror movie rules. We're going to start out today by looking at those rules and see how they hold up to the modern horror movie, and then delve into some other rules that can be added on now. In the first movie, you may not survive the movie if you have sex. This is now totally false. We have plenty of women and men that survive horror movies that are no longer virgins. A prime example of this is Sydney from Scream, because this rule was stated as she was upstairs losing her virginity, and as we all know, she survived to the end. You may not survive the movie if you drink or do drugs. This is still more or less true. If we look at a film like Cabin in the Woods, the stoner did kinda sorta almost survive. They admitted they had been putting the chemical into his weed, but for some reason it wasn't affecting him. But horror still tends to hold on to that puritanical, drinking, smoking, drugs, all bad, don't do them. But to be fair, if you're on something when you're trying to run away that's going to impair your cognitive faculties in some way, then yeah, it would make sense for you to die if you're on drugs because you can't run away from the killer as well as somebody who's not on drugs. You may not survive the movie if you say, "I'll be right back, hello," or "who's there." Still absolutely true today. "I'll be right back" implies you're splitting off from the group. And typically in horror, there's safety in numbers unless we're talking about a scenario like The Thing where you don't know who's infected. Even then, getting caught by the thing, being off on your own, is a lot simpler than it trying to catch you when you're in a whole big group of people. Hello and who's there is just a basic standard joke at this point, because you hear the weird noise, you don't think anybody's in the house. It's a way of trying to investigate the sound without actually going and doing anything. The problem is if it actually is a psycho murderer, you're kind of giving them your location. Next up is Scream 2. The rules stated in that one are specific to sequels. Number one, the body count is always bigger, and this is absolutely true. Most sequels do have a much bigger body count than the original. 9 times out of 10, it's due to that sequel theory with films of the sequel's never as good as the original. Every now and again, a third one comes in that's better. But again, it's a rarity. Making the body count bigger, making the kills more creative, is a way to continue pushing along the storyline. And it's kind of a cheap way to make sure, well, even if it's not as good at the storytelling elements, it's going to have some visuals and still draw in this audience that loves horror. Which brings us into the second one, which is death scenes are always more elaborate with more blood and gore, which absolutely ties into why the first one's still true. For the third rule, Randy begins saying, if you want your film to become a successful franchise, never ever. This is interrupted by Dewey, but in the original teaser trailer, we had the extended version of this scene, and we know what he says. The third rule is, if you want your films to become a successful franchise, never ever, under any circumstances, assume the killer is dead. And this is absolutely still true, pointing over to Zombieland with the double tap rule. Don't get stingy with your ammo. Kill him. This leads us into the third set of rules, which was put forward in Scream 3. Number 1, you've got a killer who's gonna be superhuman. Stabbing him won't work. Shooting him won't work. Basically, in the third one, you have to cryogenically freeze his head, decapitate him, or blow him up. This is kinda sorta still true. First off, the obvious example of this is Scream. Scream never had a superhuman killer, but then again, that's part of the joke of Scream. We have things like Behind the Mask, Rise of Leslie Vernon, that blow this apart. Those killers are mortal. We just understand now how they're doing it. Obviously, cryogenically freezing him, blowing him up, shooting him, it's all a reference back to Jason, somewhat to Michael Myers. It is a very old standard that your killer is invincible, but at this point, we either see a change throughout the franchise, like we see in Saw, or if it's something like Hatchet, where our killer is kind of invincible, it's because it's a throwback to that old slasher. So it's one of those, it varies. Number 2, anyone, including the main character, can die. This means use it. Absolutely true. Anyone is fair game. Assuming we have a core group
that keeps making it through the films. By the third one, odds are them coming back somewhere or being in a place where the killer could get them is wearing kind of thin. This is also why we saw Sydney kind of isolate out, because she didn't want to, again, be caught in the whole Scream situation. Even though they kept changing killers, you get the point. Like, basically, if you get a group of friends of yours hacked apart in the woods, you're probably not going to keep going back to the woods. It does make logical sense by the third one, because whatever very far-fetched reason we have for the killer coming back or finding somebody who had been in the prior films, it's a bit of a stretch, so killing them off does make sense, so the franchise can either get new blood into it, or it can end there. The third film seems to be this test of whether they're going to franchise it out or not. Some people just like to leave it at 3. They have the kind of far-fetched reason everything happens again in 3, and they kill the main character off just to be done with it. Or if they're looking to franchise it, they use the killing of one of the main characters off as an opportunity to invigorate new blood back into the series. Look at something like Nightmare on Elm Street 3. This is where we had Nancy die and give her powers away to give us a completely new Survivor Girl, so we didn't have to keep coming up with reasons to bring Nancy back. Number 3. The past will come back and bite you in the ass. Whatever you think you know about the past, forget it. The past is not at rest. Any sins you think you committed in the past are about to break out and destroy you. This is true. Again, the plot has to get more convoluted. Hatchet 3 even made a joke about this when Mary Beth Dunstan is sitting in jail. A cop questions her and says, okay, so you went out to the swamp looking for your father and brother, and everybody died, so you went back into the swamp. And flat out says that is the most convoluted, contrived bit of writing I've ever heard. The joke here is in a cell near them, the drunken Mardi Gras guy kind of makes a shocked or upset face, and that's Adam Green, who has made the Hatchet franchise. It is an in-joke, it's kind of something they've noticed, and it's pointing out, yeah, the plot's wearing a little thin. I'm going to not deal with Scream 4, just because it is a more modern movie, and it's very hard to tell when you're right on top of something like that, if it actually becomes a trend or not. So you have to give it some time. Eventually, maybe one day I'll deal with it, but just not right now. Let's talk about some things that can be added from this list that seems to come around a bit more often now. Don't go towards the sound. This is the exact same as hello or who's there. It's going towards the sound to investigate because you don't know what it is. And in a horror film, it's going to kill you. Don't listen through the wall or door. If you're doing this, A, you're snooping, which is rude. But B, odds are you're going to hear something you really don't want to hear, or you're going to get stabbed in the ear. We saw this in Scream. Don't fall. Basic coordination and cardio. This is possibly one of the oldest jokes and rules ever in a horror film. But if you notice, 90% of the time when people fall in a horror film, it's because they're looking behind them. Now, I get when an axe-wielding maniac's coming behind you, it's very hard not to look back to see how much distance you have. The problem is when you look back, you're focusing on doing something else that isn't running. You're gonna fall, you're gonna trip, just keep going. Go as fast as you can. If it gets up close on you, you will feel that. Think about if you've ever been in a room and somebody comes up behind you that you didn't realize. You can kind of feel and sense it's there. While it's not totally the same thing, if that killer closes in enough on you to start being an issue, you will know. Don't look in small holes. You're going to see something you don't want to see, or you're going to get stabbed in the eye. Or somebody's eye is going to come and look at the other side knowing you're there. And this is kind of also an outdated trope because most people do not have locking mechanisms in their home or in their exterior doors that you can look through. If you ever try to look through a keyhole, you can't see anything if you can see in at all. I believe this was more popular when skeleton keys were a thing, and most people don't use skeleton keys anymore. Don't read anything in Latin, use a Ouija board, or channel the dead. All of these things are bad. I did an entire episode just on reading Latin, and nothing good ever seems to come of Ouija boards or channeling the dead, at least in horror world. Don't ignore people acting odd. If your best friend's acting funny, seek help immediately. Don't ignore it and just assume it's a quirk. Because people tend to not have total personality shifts overnight. Even when you're going through something like puberty, it happens gradually. You just might notice it all at once, but typically it happens gradually. It's not a complete 180. Normally, if somebody is acting odd, it's a sign of, realistically, possibly mental illness or some kind of stressor in their life they're not telling you about, so talk to them. Seek help if they need it. If we're talking about horror worlds, seek some kind of professional counseling, and if all else fails, get a priest, because that's what they did in The Exorcist. Don't believe it if your friend all of a sudden stops being a monster. An example of this is like in The Exorcist, where Regan's all possessed and demony and screaming and yelling. We realize she stops and she acts like an innocent little girl and calls for her mother. And it's a trap, because why the hell would it not be a trap? Nothing really happened so far with the exorcism. Like, a few things had happened, but not much. Not enough for her to just be all of a sudden Regan again. Call 911. We've dealt with this before in another video about the killer calling to cause panic. There are plenty of reasons not to call 911, but they're very out there. In Your Next, it was a cell jammer. In The Strangers, it was cell phones being destroyed. Landlines being ripped out of walls isn't so much of an issue for most people anymore. In Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, we kind of had that joke about nobody would believe us. And a lot of times that does still hold true of this is such a fantastical situation, no cop would believe us. But outside of that, call 911. Like, even if you think people might not believe you, reporting it's not the worst thing, because they might send a cop out because you're abusing emergency services, and they might see you're not abusing emergency services. You seriously have a problem. Under the bed is a bad hiding spot. Hide and seek as a child should have told you that. That is the first place anybody looks. Also, I've seen under a lot of people's beds. You don't want to be there. It's not a good place to be. It is gross. People hide gross things under their bed. Sensible shoes, especially if you are in the woods. There is no reason to wear heels to a party at an abandoned cabin in the woods. If you want to look cute at the party with your heels, fine. Put them in your bag, put on some tennis shoes, and you can change there. It's not that hard. Don't eat or drink if you're in the middle of the situation. First off, do you really have time to eat or drink when something's chasing you, trying to kill you? Second off, if you can eat or drink, it's probably poison. Especially if it's just like left out random. Like if I was looking to kill somebody that I was just running around after and poison the food, real simple. If you have a gun, know how to use it. A gun without knowing how to properly use a gun is really freaking worthless. If you have a gun at the house, either because somebody else in your house owns a gun, or because it was a family heirloom and handed down, or for home defense, know how to work with the thing. First off, it's a safety issue. Knowing how to deal with a firearm in the house is a major safety thing. Second off, if you need it for a worst case scenario, you not knowing how to use it is much more dangerous. Don't be racist. While many might argue that the horror genre is not the gold standard for race relations in film, it does seem like if you show racist tendencies, you get dead a lot faster than anybody else. Play dead. There is no shame in hiding under bodies. Don't be a hero. Unless you have some reason not to hide under that pile of bodies, do it. Because I have seen horror films where the killer will be stabbing at bodies that they're already dead to make sure no one's doing that, but it's pretty rare. Don't do the save yourself fight. We get that where one person falls or gets injured and the other person's like, I'm gonna help you up, and they're like, no, save yourself. I can't leave you behind. No, save yourself. Just stop it. If you have a really big close-knit group of friends that don't mind you discussing shit like this, have a plan and just say, look, if I'm down, I'm bait, go. If you're in a life or death situation, manners are out the window. There's no shame in not stopping. Is it a dick move? Yeah, but you are saving yourself. The whole back and forth save yourself is just a colossal waste of time. If you're gonna do it and have the back and forth, at least do it quick. And odds are, depending on the severity of the injury, should depend on whether you actually fight to save that person or not. If it's a sprained ankle, yeah, it's stupid to let them die. If something ripped an appendage off and they're spewing blood anywhere, yeah, it sucks to lose your friend, but they're a goner and better off used as bait. And yes, we have talked about this a lot. Beware of bathrooms. No mirrors. Again, we talked about this in the bathroom horror episode. It's a small space, which makes combat not so easy. Easy to get boxed in. A lot of slippery surfaces with a lot of water equals a lot of slipping and sliding. very easy to fall and hurt yourself. Very easy for somebody to get a jump on you as well. The no mirror thing is you smash a mirror, and that's a lot of knives, essentially. Whoever grabs a shard might damage their hand, but it still could kill you. Also, anytime you look down from a mirror in horror world, something's gonna pop up in it. We just all know that at this point. Listen to any local superstition or any warning. If you ask a local for directions, and they tell you the area you're going to is a place nobody goes because of things that happened, or they're vague or cryptic, sometimes they even tell you what happened. Don't go. The locals, while you might think they are corn-pone rednecks, 9 times out of 10, they're totally right. Stay away from supposedly haunted places, or at least avoid the attic and basement in them. And on the note of attics and basements, just avoid them altogether anywhere you go. If you want to go exploring in haunted places, great. Just make sure somebody knows where you're at, and that you bring something to defend yourself with, just to be safe. Bringing something to defend yourself with makes sense either way, because there are plenty of abandoned places that have squatters that might try and harm you for essentially coming into where they're at. Some squatters don't care. Also, make sure somebody knows where you're at and you have contingencies for that, because how many times have we gotten the so-and-so doesn't know where we're at because we didn't tell anybody. Oh no, they won't look for us for days. Just tell people where you're going. Antiques are always bad news. No matter what antique it is, there is always something wrong with it. If it be a doll, a mirror, a chest, a box, yeah, always a bad idea. Just don't collect antiques. Run for well-lit, populated areas. Odds are those have an easy way out or a crowd. Now, to be fair, we did deal with this a little bit in I Know What You Did Last Summer, where one of the girls was being stabbed as a parade was going by and no one noticed. We also saw a similar situation to that in Trick or Treat, where they just assumed she was drunk and wasn't actually in duress. While those do happen, and the passerby effect is a major problem, don't get me wrong, but you running to a well-lit urban area stands a better chance for survival than you going deeper and further away from civilization. Unless you're in a situation where the town's insane and then you're kind of boned and yeah, you want to run as far away from civilization as you can. Running up the stairs. This gets a lot of heat, but think about Night of the Living Dead. They went upstairs to chuck Molotov cocktails out at the zombies to try and destroy them because they were still playing with how to kill them. It's not always the worst idea, but typically it is a bad one. Most of the time, when you're running up the stairs, it's to another story that's going to make it harder for you to get out. Each floor you put between yourself and the ground is something you theoretically might have to fall down, which obviously could kill you before the killer even gets to you. Our last bit is just about technology. When the first Scream film came out, I'll remind everybody, there was a character who was a suspect because they had a cell phone. That idea is completely ludicrous today. Saying somebody did something because they had a cell phone would never fly. So they didn't have quite the technology we do now, so there's a whole other set of rules for that. First one, keep your phone charged. Keeping your phone charged is just good sense to begin with. Say you get into a car accident or something happens and you need help. Keeping your phone charged ensures you can call somebody. That's a good idea, period. Silence your cell phones. There have been plenty of films that are starting to do this, where they're trying to run from the killer and be all sneaky and hide, and their cell phone goes off so people know where they're at. Most of the time, you don't need your speaker on high anyway. And if you realize something like this is going on, how hard is it to reach in your pocket and quickly push the down button? Most people can do that. I get it's not something that people would originally think about first thing, but it is something to keep in mind. Don't answer the phone if it's a blocked or private number. No good ever comes of that, either in movie world or the real world. Keep your car tuned up and serviced. Again, this is something that happens all the time. How many times have we seen somebody get into the car and it just won't turn over? Well, sometimes it is the villain tampering with things, not all the time. Just keeping things in running condition is just a safety measure to begin with. Give the car a quick check. Just anytime you're in a car, just back seat, blood on the steering wheel. That one happens a lot. Like somebody gets in a car and all of a sudden they're like, there's this wet thing on my hand. What's the wet thing on my, oh my God, it's blood. How did you not see that? I can see my back seat any which way I approach my car. Those are two things, just do them. But I'm not sure how people don't do them to begin with. It's not like I'm assuming somebody's hiding back there or my steering wheel is covered in blood. It's just every entry point you can see in. Put the camera down. Very few movies deal with this in a way that makes any kind of sense. The film Cloverfield had the guy filming because he believed the government was going to cover it up and wanted evidence. I can give you that. I'll suspend my disbelief on that one. But 9 times out of 10, I don't care how expensive the camera equipment is. I don't care who you borrowed it from. Most of the time, if you get out of the situation and say, hey, I dropped the camera. This person was trying to kill me. The person would understand. Like, it sucks being out the camera. It sucks being out the money, but it's heavy, it's clunky. You're looking through something that isn't just your own 2 eyes. It's just way more trouble than it's worth. Do not own a record player. This one also kind of, I guess at this point, falls under antiques. No matter how much people keep trying to bring vinyl back. No good has ever come from a record player just out and about. Or if you insist on owning one, turn it off. Just completely off. How many times have we just seen a record player randomly just come out and start playing a record? If you know full well you turned your record player totally off and that happens, go, pull the cord immediately. You don't have to problem solve much. Just pull the cord. Like, you know it has no power source now. And if it does it again, you know there is either a major technical glitch in your record player or something insane is happening and you can go. 2 rules that are less common, but they still happen enough to be noteworthy. You might kill someone you love. This ties heavily back into the gun rule. If you are shooting blindly and don't really know how to handle yourself, the odds of you having an adrenaline rush and shooting at any little noise that comes near you is a distinct possibility. Unfortunately, sometimes, like in The Strangers, you kill a loved one. Even without a gun, though, like in Inside, when she just had a knitting needle, she killed her own mother because she was in a high-stress situation, didn't recognize she was just ready to stab when she opened the door, just so happened to be our mother on the other side of the door. That is a possibility. I'm not saying take the time to check, because you can't. It is a possibility in these situations that you will end up killing somebody that you didn't intend to. You also might dry fire a gun. Again, tying back into the gun comfort thing. If it's your first time shooting a gun, and you've never done this before, and you're in a high-stress situation, repeating firing till it's done is actually pretty common and normal. You probably shouldn't be at a point where you're comfortable enough to just be shooting at people willy-nilly, but it is absolutely a stress response. It makes sense. And we see it dealt with every now and again. One of those things, I know people complain about, like, why didn't they just stop shooting? You can't. It's a stress and it's adrenaline that happens. So what do you guys think? Do you think some of these rules don't work? Do you think some hold up that I said didn't? Leave your comments below. As always, if you like what you're seeing, please hit like, comment, subscribe. If you don't like what you're seeing, please leave me a comment and let me know. Thank you. In a world where a whole bunch of other channels have I fucked up that line.